Liam Payne. What happened to the ill-fated star? One thing we know for sure, it was a tragic end to a life cut far too short. We're gonna go through a timeline of his case to try and make sense of this tragedy. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and this is Scandal. Liam Payne was only 31 years old when he died. It was a complete shock. It's not like he was sick. We didn't have any sort of warning signs. This is a young man and a celebrity. No one expected this. I mean, it's one of those things like I remember exactly where I was. I was in a restaurant in New York with Law&Crime reporter Elizabeth Milner, and our phones went off. And we're like, wait, what? He's our age. He's so young. And honestly, as the case kept evolving and more details kept coming out, it just got more and more confusing. We still don't know a lot of the answers. I mean, what really happened? We're going to try to figure all of that out today. But to do so, we first have to rewind a bit and talk about who Liam Payne is. He was a singer, he was from the United Kingdom, and he really got his start when he appeared on the UK's version of The X Factor. What I think is really important to note, and you probably know this story, but it's honestly just really cool, I think, is that he auditioned as a solo performer. But Simon Cowell, who you probably know from The X Factor or even American Idol, he saw something there, and he saw something in a couple of other solo performers too. You might have heard of their names. Harry Styles, for instance, Niall Horan, Zayn Malik, Louis Tomlinson. Yeah, all of those people put together, plus Liam Payne, Simon kind of brought them together and they made the band called One Direction. That was huge. I mean, it was elementary school age girls. I mean, boys too. Middle school, high school, even when I was in college, a girl in my hall loved them. So they were huge from about 2011 to 2016. And even after they went on a hiatus or they broke up a little bit, their careers still kind of blossomed even as individual artists. I'm sure you've heard music from Harry Styles or Zayn Malik, and these individual careers is actually what brought Liam Payne to Argentina when he died. It was actually Liam's former bandmate, Niall Horan, who brought him there. He was performing on his tour. It was called The Show, Live on Tour. So Liam was like, hey, I'm going to go to Argentina to hang out with my former bandmate, my friend, see him perform, see the city, whatever it may be. So in October of last year, Liam Payne and his girlfriend, Kate Cassidy, made their way to Argentina. So when they get there, they first go to the United States Embassy, and this is in order to renew one of Liam Payne's working visas in the United States. And at first when I read this, I'm like, okay, yes, it's a valid part of the timeline. It's something that he did leading up to his death, but is it really connected? Does this really matter? And then as I was thinking about it a bit more, it kind of checked out and made sense in my mind. So this is something that Kate Cassidy brought up, and we're going to talk about it later on in this story. But she basically says, in the days before Liam died, when she was with him, he seemed totally normal. She says there were no red flags. There was nothing that completely stood out to her. Everything seemed really good. And then when you put two and two together with him going to the US Embassy here to renew his visa, it makes me think he was of sound mind. This guy's thinking ahead. He's like, okay, if I want to stay in the US, if I want to continue to work, I have to make sure there's this deadline with my visa. I want to make sure that I get everything in order. So to me, just hearing that, it makes it sound like he was of sound mind and he kind of had things together, at least in that area. More on that later. I want to talk about the timeline though. Eventually, he ended up staying at this hotel called the Casa Sur in the Palermo neighborhood of Buenos Aires. Liam Payne and Kate kind of hang out in Argentina, do their thing, vacation, visiting a friend, whatever you want to call it. They're hanging out. But on October 14th, she heads back to America, back to Florida, but Liam stays put in Argentina. And here's the part I wanted to come back to. Kate Cassidy again says, no red flags. Nothing was off. We left on amicable terms. She says now in retrospect, she had no idea this was going to happen because everything seemed completely normal. And there are conflicting reports. I mean, some people say things similar to Kate Cassidy, and they're like, yeah, he was joking around. He was being silly. He was being his normal self. Everything was great and all was good. But then there are some other reports that say something a bit different, that he was drinking, that he was using, that he was obviously on something. And one of the reports I read said someone was speaking to him and he said something to the effect of, I'm so effed up because I was in a boy band. So there are conflicting reports here and there exactly about what he was like in the many days leading up to his death. But we do know in the time immediately before it, he was acting kind of off. And this is something that hotel staff at the Casa Sur kind of pointed out. He had a few different instances where he was acting, I don't want to say wild. He was acting off, maybe potentially even erratic. So there was a time in the hotel lobby when he physically couldn't stand. Like he was so inebriated that he was like crumpling over and like needed people to help keep him stable to stand up or walk away. There's also reports that he was like yelling, throwing a fit, I guess, kind of, and smashing a computer. So things that are kind of erratic and not totally normal. There are also a lot of reports about drinking and drugs, which we'll get into when it comes to toxicology. But there are some allegations that a couple of people provided these drugs. And one of the people is a waiter that met Payne on this very trip. His name is Brian Pays, and he would later be accused of providing Liam Payne with cocaine. We'll bring up him a bit more later, but right now we have to go to October 16th, which is the night of Liam Payne's death. Before he dies, hotel staff calls emergency responders and says, "We have a guest here who is acting out of their mind. I don't know if they're a danger to themselves. I don't know if they're a danger to others. There is a balcony in their room. We're really worried. Please come to help." And according to reports, this is what this worker said on the phone verbatim, quote, "I don't know if the guest's life is in danger. The room has a balcony and we are afraid he might do something." When emergency responders arrive on the scene, they find Liam Payne. It's around 5:11 p.m. and he's pronounced dead on the scene. So right away, everyone's asking, what happened? Did he jump? Was he pushed? Did he fall? Was he drunk? Was he high? No one knows. And according to most reports, he was alone in his hotel room at the time of the fall. Now, there are multiple different reports and theories about what could have happened. One of them is that he was trying to escape. So this kind of goes back to a different situation. His death was in October, but in September, just the month prior, apparently some reports say that his security had, I don't want to say barricaded, had put him in his hotel room kind of to help him calm down. Basically, he was going through something, like his emotions weren't at neutral or in a good mood. Like he was upset in some way. I'm not going to say he was throwing a fit, but he was going through something emotionally, obviously. So his security, and this sounds like it was out of love or protection for Liam, they put him in his hotel room and basically say like, "Hey, sit it out. Take a couple of deep breaths here. Like, ride out the wave in your hotel room. And then once you're good, we'll let you back out and everything will be fine." And that's kind of what it seems like was happening there. However, there are reports that he escaped out of the hotel room in that instance. So some people are wondering, is that what happened here in Argentina too? And there is some evidence that potentially this may have happened, a couple of clues. One is that there was a bag found on the second floor balcony. So as I said, Liam Payne's on the third floor balcony, and then on the second floor right beneath it, investigators later find a bag. Inside it, there's a whiskey bottle, and there's a note that says, "For Liam." So some people are hypothesizing that potentially he threw his bag down from the third floor balcony onto the second, kind of to have his bag there ready and waiting for him. And then he was going to jump off onto the second and kind of escape away, so that he could get out of his hotel room. That is one theory. Then there's a different theory that he fell, but there are so many questions still with this because we don't know if he was unconscious. So the question is, did he, suddenly go unconscious while he's standing on the edge of the balcony and then fall? Is it possible that he lost consciousness midway through the air as he was falling? Or did he lose consciousness immediately when he hit the ground? And I think consciousness is really a topic of discussion in all of this because of drugs and alcohol use. This is definitely something medical examiners looked at. They inspected both his blood and his urine. They tested it and found traces of alcohol, cocaine, prescription antidepressants, and pink cocaine, which is really just like a slang name or fancy term for ecstasy, ketamine, and caffeine all mixed together. Now, investigators say just this mix alone, regardless of the fall, this mix alone could have been toxic for him. Also inside of his hotel room, investigators found some drug paraphernalia. There were narcotic supplies, there was a burnt candle, a burnt soda can, a piece of aluminum foil, and a Dove soap box carton. This one's kind of interesting. Investigators later determined that whoever gave Payne the drugs that he used, they believe they put them inside the Dove soap carton. So like, if you just saw the carton, you'd think, oh, okay, this is, from the hotel, those little trolley carts that they have in the halls, like give you more towels, give you more soap. Like, oh, it just looks like a Dove soap carton, but inside was actually drugs. Moving forward into the timeline, we're now going to jump to November 6th, and this is when Payne's body is flown back to the United Kingdom where he's from. And investigators there take a look at his body, and this is where we hear for the first time that the cause of death is polytrauma, which means he has multiple traumatic injuries to his body. And this is something we heard from investigators in Argentina too, the first ones to take a look at his body. They said he died because of trauma, internal and external hemorrhage caused by the fall. And according to experts from Argentina, I'm going to read this part verbatim, it was, quote, cranial fracture and extremely serious injuries that led to his immediate death. So at this point, even though we may know how he died, what led to it, we still need to know more. We want to make sense of what happened. And eventually, some people were actually charged criminally. First, there's the hotel manager, a woman by the name of Gilda Martin, and the chief receptionist at Casa Sur, a man named Esteban Grazi. They were both charged with manslaughter. And I'll break this down for you. Prosecutors in Argentina say the manager should have known better. She allegedly saw Liam Payne. She knew he was a threat. I mean, this guy couldn't even stand on his own. So prosecutors are saying, hey, this was your responsibility. It was negligent for you not to call police right away. It was negligent of you to allow him to go up to his hotel room and be alone when he obviously needed medical help or at least care of someone. It's kind of a similar story in the charges for the chief receptionist. Apparently, he's the one who orchestrated Payne going from the lobby up to his hotel room. So this is the part where Payne just cannot stand up. And according to prosecutors, the chief receptionist orchestrated a couple of people helping to carry Payne up to his room. So almost acting as human crutches, dragging him a bit, helping him walk because he was unable to stand. And it's kind of the same thing here. Prosecutors are like, this man literally couldn't stand. You had people help him, drag him to his room. He couldn't stand. He obviously should not have been alone. You're negligent. This is manslaughter. There's another person who was charged with manslaughter in all of this. It was Liam Payne's longtime friend, Regilo Norris, who went by the name Roger. So Roger has this long-standing relationship with Liam Payne, and Payne himself has struggled with alcohol addiction, substance abuse, all of that. And by all accounts, Roger was a great friend during all of this. He would help him stay clean, be a support system, an anchor there, to help him maintain his sobriety. This is often what we're seeing in reports about their relationship. But according to Argentinian prosecutors, Roger was at fault because he left Liam Payne there. And when this first happened, we didn't know the names of the people who were charged or who were implicated in all of this. So it just said a longtime friend of Liam Payne abandoned him on the scene. And I remember thinking that, oh, it's a charge of abandonment. And basically what prosecutors are saying is that you saw him. He couldn't stand. He was obviously intoxicated, inebriated. He needed help. And you just left him there at the hotel. He's charged with manslaughter based on that. The other two people that were charged in this include Brian Pays, that waiter that I spoke about from before, who allegedly provided Payne with some drugs, and the other person also allegedly provided drugs. It's a person named Ezekiel David Perea, who was an employee at Casa Sur. So those last two people I mentioned, at the time of this very recording, they're still charged, they're still in jail. However, the other three people, the hotel employees Gilda Martin and Esteban Grazi and the friend Roger Norris, have all been cleared. Actually, a judge back in February ruled that none of these people could have prevented Payne's death. Here's a quote from the ruling specifically about Roger Norris. The judge writes, quote, "It is possible that, if he had stayed in his company at all times, Payne would not have obtained the drugs and alcohol in the quantities necessary for the state of intoxication he exhibited at the time of his death. But it cannot be ruled out that, even if he had taken those extreme precautions, that Payne would have managed to obtain the substances anyway, as is common among addicts, even when they are under the loving care of their family." In his statement, Roger Norris said, quote, I never abandoned Liam. I went to his hotel 3 times that day and left 40 minutes before this happened. There were over 15 people at the hotel lobby chatting and joking with him when I left. I could have never imagined something like this would happen. Now, it's a kind of similar thing we're hearing from Kate Cassidy as well. Speaking in an interview to The Sun, she said, quote, Liam was in such a good headspace when I left Argentina. We were in such a great place, just full of love. He was so happy and positive, and I just can't even believe the way things truly ended. After charges were dropped, we heard from Payne's family for one of the first times. They released a statement to BBC, and it's pretty long, so here's just part of it. Quote, we understand that the investigation into Liam's death was absolutely necessary, and the family recognizes the work done by the Argentinian authorities. However, the family accepts the Court of Appeal's decision to drop all charges. That's basically where the case is at right now, but I want to dig even deeper, and here's a perfect time to cut to our interview with our expert guest. All right, we got to get to the best part of our episode, which is the interview. And our guest today is so amazing. It's Tracy Walder, former CIA officer, former FBI agent. You've probably even seen her videos on TikTok or Instagram at The Unexpected Spy. Tracy, you are a wealth of knowledge in all subject matter. Thank you for coming on. And I wanted to start with really the basics about Liam Payne. When something like this happens, he falls, he's pushed, was it suicide? We don't know. Like in the early stages, how does the investigation even begin?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Sierra, and honestly, congratulations on this new show. It's
Oh,
it's
thank
it's awesome.
you.
I think the first thing that you're dealing with, we have to remember that this did not occur in the United States, right? So that's the first thing we have to remember is that we are going to be liaising and working with another law enforcement that is from another country, excuse me. And so I think that's kind of the first thing we have to remember. I think what they're going to look at first is there any other imminent threat or any other imminent danger, right? Is this someone that purposely pushed Mr. Payne? Because if it is, then we have to neutralize that threat and get into a manhunt sort of style situation. So, as you mentioned before, the critical thing is obviously securing the crime scene, right? You want to preserve any and all evidence that is in that crime scene and have a controlled amount of people going in and out of it, but really determining whether this was an accident, suicide, or a homicide is really going to be issue number one because they really need to figure out if there is still an imminent threat that is out there.
And it does kind of seem like that was one of the first things that they did, as you said, and the first things that we, the public, were learning about, that they didn't believe someone pushed him. And also, they didn't believe that this was a suicide. How do you think that they came to that determination? What would that have looked like?
I think, first of all, if someone had pushed him or thrown him off of the balcony, one of the things that would be missing is typically what happens if you or I lean up against a railing, especially one that's outside. There's typically a collection of dust, pollen, whatever on that. And if he had just sort of sailed over it, meaning someone threw him over it, none of that would be disturbed. My guess is they did see that it had been disturbed. So that sort of takes out someone throwing him over. Now you've got really a suicide or you have a homicide. I think what led them to, excuse me, suicide or you have an accident, quite frankly. And I think one of the things that led them to the accident was, first of all, they found multiple items had been broken within the hotel room. And so that indicates, once you kind of rule out the idea that someone else had been in there breaking things, that he had perhaps been under the influence. They also found lots of drug paraphernalia that was in the room. And so I think they started coming to the conclusion that he may have actually not been conscious, which is what they came to ultimately at the time of his fall, and that this was an accident, which is incredibly unfortunate.
And I think in this case, we really do have to talk about drugs for so many reasons and alcohol because in his hotel room, there was a plethora of things that were found. And then, of course, when the medical examiners or whoever it was, tested his blood and his urine, they found kind of a lot of that. And I think that eventually is what led to charges to the fact that people had provided these illegal substances to him. How would all of that work, though, for investigators to track down who the people who might have been involved were?
Right, you're absolutely right. So the toxicology reports did come back positive for alcohol, antidepressants, and cocaine. That's what was found in his system. But obviously, his cause of death was the fall. The amount of drugs in his system is not what ultimately killed him, although I do believe it probably caused him to lose consciousness and judgment. So it was a contributing factor. I think next, again, police really started to think about who supplied these drugs. Obviously, cocaine is not a legal drug to obtain. So, how did he obtain that? And they ultimately actually charged five people, but the charges have been dropped against three of them, mostly hotel staff. That's who they dropped the charges against. Those were negligence charges, basically stating that they should have never allowed him back into his hotel room because it was problematic that there was a balcony there. I always felt that those charges were a little thin, in my opinion, because the reality is he is an adult who is ultimately responsible for himself. But what we're seeing is, in my opinion, this very positive trend of going after drug suppliers. We actually saw that in Matthew Perry's death as well. If you remember the ketamine queen,
Yeah.
as well as the two doctors that were ultimately indicted as a result. I think that this is a great thing. So one of the ways, my guess is that they were able to track down the suppliers of cocaine who still have the charges against them, is most likely, again, I don't know for sure, but most likely through his phone. Obviously, he had to, through probably WhatsApp, because he was in a foreign country, liaise with individuals who were providing this to him, or individuals that were with him, right? His friends that were with him during that trip. Did they know who was supplying him with the drugs? Or hotel security camera. Did he meet people at the hotel to obtain drugs? So that's most likely how they were able to track down these individuals. I'm sorry for the long-winded response there.
No, you brought up so many good points. As I was researching this, I was thinking about Matthew Perry too, because that is kind of a trend that we saw here. And the phones are something that I wanted to talk to you about too, because I feel like I say this over and over, but they're so useful. I mean, if you just look
Mhm.
through your texts, you can learn a lot about a person or the call log
Yes.
or their searches, where they were. I mean, it's just like a wealth of knowledge here. Do you think there were other things that investigators were looking for on his phone too?
So I call cell phones, what we used to call at CIA, the new pocket litter. Same with FBI, right? A lot of what we would do was, particularly for overseas and places where people didn't have phones, people's pockets tell a story, especially males who carry around, large wallets. It tells a story, right, of who you are and what you're about. It's the same thing about a phone. That has taken the place of physical pocket litter. And so, to your point, it absolutely tells us a story. And I ultimately think, too, in the case of Matthew Perry, that's exactly how they found these individuals
Mhm.
were from the phones. And so it's a great, obviously, investigative tool. Now, are they is Liam Payne texting individuals, please provide me with this amount of cocaine at this location? No, that's absolutely not what's going on. So it takes some time to obviously unwind that. They speak in code, they speak around each other. But the reality is it really helps build sort of an open shut case, if you will, because you have these individuals basically admitting to crimes on their phone. You cannot change that data. Even though you delete it, it's still stored. You cannot change that data. That becomes admissible in court. And then it becomes almost as strong, in my opinion, as almost like DNA type of situation, because you really can't explain that away other than saying maybe someone else had your phone at the time.
I was thinking the exact same thing when you mentioned DNA, because in cases when prosecutors can bring this up and say, these are the texts, this is exactly what they said, or, here's a fingerprint, this person was there. That's something that the jury can really hang their hat on and say, yeah, we know you were there. We saw it. It's right here, plain as day. And I'm wondering too if investigators may even look also for DNA to prove that potentially, like there was the Dove soap carton, for instance, maybe someone's fingerprints are on there. Okay, then we have double corroborating evidence that you texted this person, even though it may have been in code, and we have your fingerprints or DNA. Would they have like brushed for that sort of thing too?
100%. Even, just going back to the phones and social media, if we even look at the case of Murdoch, that's how he was convicted, was through
Yeah.
Snapchat. I mean, really, that's ultimately, in my opinion, what was the nail in the coffin for him. But I think in this case, they had to have dusted the room. There's no question that they dusted the room. And that is probably how they eliminated a homicide very quickly, and that they most likely didn't find any other forensic evidence like fingerprints, hairs, those kinds of things near that balcony other than Mr. Payne's own forensic evidence. And so I think that is probably how they came to the conclusion that it was an accident. But yes, you could easily double corroborate something if you are able to find DNA that maybe it's on the baggie that the cocaine was in,
Mhm.
if they still had the baggie in the hotel room, right? You don't know. There are so many different ways that you could try to corroborate that.
So we talked about the drug charges, and you brought this up too, but I want to circle back. The other charges that have since been dropped, it sounds like negligence, abandonment, leaving him alone. I mean, it sounds like you kind of gave me a bit of your opinion, and I think I tend to agree a bit in the fact that, is it their responsibility to block this man from going alone into his hotel room? What do you think? Can you talk a bit more about that?
It's hard, right? Because I've obviously never been in that situation, but I also think that his death is a truly horrible tragedy. But I think it's really easy to play Monday morning quarterback in these kinds of situations. You don't know what he was doing exactly in that room. We do know that he was being violent in that room, as there were multiple calls to 911 that things were being broken in that room. The manager of the hotel is not necessarily security guard, and there's only so much that they could do. Now, should his close friends have perhaps done more and prevented him from doing that? I think we can say, yeah, maybe they should have. But again, we don't know the circumstances of that situation. And I am not absolving these people of any kind of moral obligation that I think they probably had to their friend or to an individual that was in trouble. But at the same time, I think it's going to be really hard to prove, quite frankly, that the hotel staff was truly negligent.
I do think you're right. I like what you said about the Monday morning quarterback because so often we think, oh, this could never happen to me. That would never happen. So, they're not jumping to conclusions that it's going to be the worst, that he will fall, that he would die because of all of this. So I think that's something to point out. Something you've mentioned a couple times too, and I've kind of just kept in my brain that I haven't touched on yet, but I wanted to go back to is this happened in Argentina. Then we have the fact that he came from the US, he was working on a United States visa, and then of course he's from the United Kingdom. So several different countries we have all together there. What would that look like for the investigation? FBI, Interpol? I mean, what happens?
So obviously, and you're right, this could be very confusing. So the Argentine police obviously are the point people in this investigation. It did happen in their country, Buenos Aires, I think, believed to be more specific. And
Yep.
so it happened there. So they are the lead investigators. However, they are liaising most likely with Interpol, less so regarding the US connection, because yes, obviously he has a US work visa, no question, but he is a British citizen. So he belongs theoretically to the British. And so most likely Interpol will be involved in that investigation in terms of liaising with information back and forth. I would expect also that the FBI's legal attaché office in Buenos Aires is also notified and involved, simply because of the work that he was doing. Also, I believe his girlfriend was there with him, although she had left before the
Mhm.
incident happened. She will most likely be questioned, and she has been questioned, excuse me, and she is American. And so the reality is they will need to be involved in helping with that questioning as well. Also, my guess is because of the technical advances the FBI has, they are probably assisting in going through his phones and those kinds of things.
I'm wondering if that makes things more complicated. The fact that we have so many different nationalities, so many different countries. I mean, just on a normal case, that's tricky. But then, in addition to all of that, we have a celebrity who's known by his face, his name, his voice. I mean, those things compounded, does it make the investigation even more difficult?
I personally don't believe so, to be honest with you. It would make it more difficult if other countries were involved from an investigative standpoint, but they're not. Argentina is the point person, or the point country, excuse me. And so I actually don't think it is as complicated as it probably sounds, right? With 3 different countries, that is complicated. But if they're running point on this, most likely it's actually running pretty smoothly. And quite frankly, they were very quick and efficient in terms of bringing charges up. So this happened in the middle-ish of October, and we're not even 6 months out. And they brought charges, in my opinion, relatively quickly.
I agree with you. The fact that we aren't even half a year out from all of this. Do you think there's any movement ahead in this case, investigation wise, or potentially other charges if they find out more information? What is your guess for the future of it?
I personally don't think that there will be other charges, particularly when we see that 3 have actually been dropped. I think the other individuals, though, right now will be preparing for trial or hopefully them getting some kind of a plea. They're looking at about 4 to 15 years each, depending on that. It sounds like they have a lot of evidence, so I suspect that those individuals will plea, although obviously I don't know for sure.
It's really just a sad case that we have to talk about, a life cut far too short. But thank you, Tracy, for coming on and kind of walking us through the case and giving us a look behind the curtain into what the FBI, CIA, or Interpol might have done.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Sierra.
That was a look at the timeline in the case of Liam Payne and everything we know as of right now. That's all for Scandal today. I'm Sierra Gillespie, and we'll see you next time.